runs London Futurists brilliantly and wrote an excellent chapter in the book on the prospects of Democracy 2.0 and how the governments actually respond to the kind of world that's being created and evolving as we speak. David, over to you.
Many thanks, Rohit. So as Rohit said, we will be diving a bit more into some of that belly, that jamboree of material. We're going to be diving a bit more into it in the remaining talks. And I'm going to pick up the question that has just been asked. What response should we look from our politicians to these possibilities? And I'm going to argue that everybody interested in the future of business should be paying attention strongly to the future of politics. But I can summarise what we've just heard. There is a lot of business disruption ahead, and most of that business disruption is being driven by technological change, exponential technological change, whether it's nanotech, biotech, infotech, cognotech, robotics, green technology, and so forth, ... So this is changing business more profoundly, probably, in the next 10, 20 years than in any preceding decade. But this process, whereby bright people get ideas of products and they develop them and deploy them into the market, that is challenged, it is moderated by humans. And humans have many impacts on this process. It depends on people's expectations. What kind of products are we looking to buy? It also depends on the incentives that are available to people who want to develop these products. It depends on what kind of regulations they have to cope with, what kind of standards are put in place, which everybody needs to agree to. It depends on what subsidies are made available to encourage or to discourage investment in various areas. And critically, it depends on how well the markets are operating. Are the markets biased, or are the markets working smoothly? And all of these things have one thing in common, which is that they are in turn impacted by politics. And if we look at many of the businesses that Rohit mentioned, there is politics lurking in the background. I don't mean company politics, I mean legislation. So let's look at Uber. Uber, fantastic success story in many ways. Here's a map of all the places in the world where Uber has run into significant legal and controversial issues. So there's 65 places listed. If I just take one example, in December last year in Seoul, South Korea, they've issued a legal indictment against Uber and, by the way, against the CEO. They have violated Korean laws because they haven't got the appropriate licenses for taxis. And if you do click on the Uber app in the App Store, you will find lots of 5-star reviews, you will find lots of 1-star reviews. There are lots of hard issues here, and governments are struggling to try and work it out. Let's look at 23andMe, a company that's doing profound things with personal genetics, allowing people information which they never had before. For just £125, I think you can buy the 23andMe kit from Superdrug or from Boots. But if you're in America, the FDA has taken a view, no, you can't do that anymore. The FDA has written recently to the CEO of 23andMe a warning letter saying you have not got marketing clearance for all the stuff you are doing. The letter said, actually, you're a pretty innovative company. What they said is you are doing more and more things. The list of uses has grown over time. And many of these innovative uses, they're actually quite dangerous. They're matters potentially of life and death. If people get some of the information from your website, you can change their lives. And maybe they're going to change it in the wrong ways. And so you have not got permission for this. And so they have had to change their business significantly because of that regulatory influence. Then there's this stuff. Now, I don't know anything about this at all, but I'm told there's something called legal highs. And legal highs are drugs that have been developed legally, which the government is not caught up with. And one side effect of these legal highs is that many people are dying. In fact, more than double the number of people are dying out of these legal highs in the UK than 4 years ago. What is the government doing? Well, you might expect the government to say this is dangerous. They have just jumped in here with a blanket ban. They have said any substance which is intended for human consumption, which is capable of producing a psychoactive effect, if you do that, you will be sent to prison for 7 years. A bit heavy-handed, and many people are up in arms. The drugs charities are saying this is very counterproductive. More than that, many would-be entrepreneurs are worried that their potential innovations are going to be caught by that same regulation. Then there's the role of subsidies. Let's look at the subsidies for the wind farm industry. The government has just pulled back the subsidies. They said, we, the government, are listening to the voice of the people. The people like beautiful countrysides. These are not beautiful. We are stopping the subsidy. And therefore, that is impacting how the wind farm industry is going to work. Let's look at the fossil fuel industry. What is the governments around the world doing about the fossil fuel industry? They are subsidizing it according to the IMF. According to the IMF, they are subsidizing it to $5.3 trillion in this year, which is more than all the healthcare expenditure of all the governments in the world. So there is government intervention here, which is having a big impact on these industries. I'm not against all regulation. I think regulation is very important. If I'm flying in that airplane, taking off from Heathrow, I do not want somebody flying a drone into my path. And this is not a hypothetical example. There was, in December last year, a near-miss case. It's not quite known who did it, whether it was just some parent who was showing off to his children and lost control and didn't know what it was, or whether it was some bad person who really did want to cause damage. But this was given a rating of A, serious risk of collision. There is a need for some legislation. I'm glad that the government got involved with Microsoft some years ago and said, Microsoft, you have to unbundle your browser. Do not tell everybody there's only one browser you can use and force them all to use Internet Explorer. As a result of that government intervention, we now have a rich choice, a very thriving industry. Governments do have a role to prevent monopolies. And governments have a role to influence banking as well. I'm not saying they should rule out all innovation. I don't agree necessarily with this elderly couple who says they just want their banks to be a bank. Innovation is great, but if it's innovation that encourages reckless behavior, that means that the bankers get all the upside and the citizens get all the downside, that is no good. So to summarize what I have said so far, we do need some regulations, but the regulatory systems that are in place are often outdated. People are applying regulations applying to yesterday's problems as opposed to thinking about tomorrow's opportunities. The regulators are often captured by vested interests who are saying, we quite like the way things are, we're going to impose standards to prevent disruptive companies getting in there. And the politicians themselves are often out of their depth. That is the situation which we must look at if we are interested in new products. The solution is also here. The solution is the exponential technologies. The exponential technology isn't just about disrupting business, it is potentially about transforming politics. We can do politics, we can do regulations, we can do this legal systems in new ways now. And we can look forward to what I've called in the book Democracy 2.0 or Politics 2.0. And I've chosen that term deliberately by reference to Web 1.0 and Web 2.0. And probably many of you are too young to remember this, but once upon a time the web was very small. Just 45 billion. This slide, by the way, comes from 2006. I dug this out of my archive back another 10 years at Web 1.0. And the difference is not just that there's more sites in the Web 2.0, it's a different kind of conversation. Web 1.0 was mostly read-only. You went onto the original websites to find things out that wise authorities had put there. Whereas with Web 2.0, there were many more people writing, originating content. It was not just this one-way flow, it was many more people generating collective intelligence. And that's what technology can do with politics as well. And so Politics 1 or Web 1 is just about pushing information to the edge. Politics 2, Web 2 is about intelligence in the network. Moving from a library to a conversation. Moving from just having a few people who are picked out as the key politicians to a user reputation system whereby people award each other reputation, whether it's karma or points on a review, and we can figure out who knows what they're talking about. Changing from retrieval from interaction to user consumption to generating content and so on. There's a lot of technology that was involved in making this happen, a lot of clever technology. It used to be called AJAX, asynchronous JavaScript and HTML, and it's the same with politics too. So, just to summarize, we're in this situation today where politics is very unsatisfactory. It's got an important purpose, but it's not doing that very well. And we can look forward, as I've explained in the chapter, to Politics 2.0, in which we have a real wisdom of crowds, in which we can figure out what's correct and what's not correct. We have real-time fact-checking, so when somebody's speaking, there's little things popping up in their visual feed telling you. And which we have AI, artificial intelligence, which is supplementing human intelligence. That is the positive future. But there's also a negative future. Don't clap too soon. Don't rush ahead and imagine this all straightforward, because we also have a risk of what I've called politics zero. Because the same people who could take this technology and use it for wisely, you could end up with a much worse situation than we've got today. We could end up with mass surveillance. We could end up with a modern day version of bread and circus. The kind of distraction from Soma, as discussed in Brave New World. And we could end up, as we're seeing in some parts of the world, with government by the 1% for the 1%. And it is not clear which way we are going, and it is up to us to decide. And that was going to be my last slide, but this morning I noticed an endorsement by a very interesting politician in America. You heard of Robert Kennedy? Robert Kennedy? So his grandson, Robert Kennedy III, overnight endorsed this guy as the forthcoming president of the United States of America. So Robert Kennedy III said, I'm supporting Zoltan Isvan because he wants to take politics out of the age that was designed before even there were telephones. He wants to get away from a technological nightmare to harness the power of science for the betterment of humanity. So I'm signing myself up, along with Robert Kennedy III, to use this technology for a transhumanist future, expecting it's not going to be hard, it's not going to be easy, but expecting it is a very vital thing to do. Thank you very much.
The whole format today is a bit like TED on speed. Each of the speakers has 8 minutes because we want to try and get through all of them by 5 o'clock. So we've got pairs basically, David and now Julian's going to talk, and then we'll have a few minutes of questions after each pair. So coming up next we've got Julian Snape, who's going to talk for 8 minutes.
Or a bit shorter than that because my voice is going. So.
Excellent. You're going to have to project over the people at the back. Or move into the middle then, wasn't it? He's going to talk to us about 3D printing and its impact on a major industry, which is construction. Over to you, Julian.
I'm Julian Snape. I run a company called Technovation Anglia. I've got a particular interest. I'm a futurist and I'm not an expert in construction, but I've got a very big interest in construction. Back in my school days, I tried to get myself involved in architecture. Unfortunately, timetable clashed. I couldn't do technical drawing and physics at the same time, so I took physics, of course. But I'm now going back and looking at what's happening in the construction industry and architecture. Now, most people have heard of 3D printing at the moment. It's been around for quite a while. It was developed in America, the automotive industry, to produce prototypes to accelerate the development of cars. Recently, you can even walk into places like Mappings and buy yourself a £500 little 3D printer, hook up to your PC and start printing out cell phone cases and things like that. What they're now doing in the construction industry, or in some academic elements of the construction industry at the moment, are thinking about scaling up 3D printing and using different materials. Most people are aware of plastics. Some people are aware of metals you can use to print. But what they're now doing in the construction industry is using a new variety of materials such as bioplastics and concretes, quick setting concretes. Now, apologies, I haven't got a slideshow today, but I had a bit of a disaster with the latest Microsoft update. It killed my Microsoft Office. But hopefully, the next week or so, I'll be able to have one of these available for you. So I'll work with Rohit and getting that out to you. Company in Amsterdam, a Dutch company called DUS, have produced something called the 3D Canal House, which you go over there and now see. It's basically a technology demonstrator. They are printing large-scale panels, specifically from their digital CAD files, in a new bioplastic, and assembling that together. Now they've got a house that looks pretty much like one of the Dutch fronted houses out there. It's very much off-site printing and then bringing it on-site to be assembled in normal methodologies. However, one of the more exciting areas of 3D printing in the construction industry is to speed the whole process up. At the moment, you've got to have in traditional construction, you have lots of different people and tradesmen and architects and builders and plumbers and glaziers. and they all cost money, and they all come along, and it takes weeks, probably months to build a house or to build a large industrial building. Now a company in China, you might have heard of, called Winsum, has been able to produce, albeit small houses, two-bedroom type things. They've built 10 of them in 24 hours using a 3D printer, 3D concrete printer. Yes, they were just two-bedroom buildings, and yes, they were fabricated off-site and put together again by builders, but it took a lot quicker than your week, 2 weeks, or several months to build a house. They've now followed that up by building large high-rise buildings and even a multi-bedroom mansion. Again, built off-site using a large 3D printer, using a concrete faucet in concrete. If you go onto YouTube, if you get a copy of the book, you'll see my references, the YouTube reference to it, you can go on there, you can watch it in action. This is then being taken a step further forward. A chap called, I'm going to get his name right here, it's Berok Koznevis from the University of Southern California. Professor Berok Koznevis has actually devised a system you can actually start doing this printing on site, which is a gantry system, looks like a giant scaled up 3D printer, which is taken onto site, and it actually has the concrete pumped into a nozzle, which then goes over the whole of the site and starts to build up the actual building from the ground, from the foundations upwards. And again, they hope they can build a building. Had some test pieces, but it's not been done the full building yet, but they're hoping about 24 hours they should be able to build, say, a 3-bedroom house. And of course, because you're not employing all the various builders and construction workers and so forth, you're not taking on those sort of costs. And the Chinese houses, the 2-bedroom houses, cost less than a decent British garden shed. It's about $4,000 for one of those. So you're looking at probably reducing the cost of a 3-bedroom house from, depending where you are in the country, from £150,000 to £250,000 down to £20,000 to £30,000. Obviously, the land is going to cost you the same rate as it is at the moment. So that is one of the factors you've got to, but the actual cost of building it is going to be a lot cheaper. Also, the digital CAD facilities that you have that are being developed will allow them to actually put in windows and plumbing conduits, and possibly in the future actually to use a metal 3D printer, sintering system, to actually put in strengthening systems into the walls, metal system into the walls, and plastic for the plumbing actually there and then. So the whole house may be able to be printed with everything, maybe even glazing. Hewlett Packard, Bristol Labs are developing a 3D printer to print glazing. So those possibilities are out there. The Advanced Institute for Architecture in Catalonia have now combined 3D printers with robots, and they've got these little mini printers that rush around the place or crawl around the place and actually start building buildings with almost like an icing bag that will print any shape of building from a CAD file upwards, and a climber then climbs up it and starts to finish it off at a higher level. And there's even a finisher device which will, by suctioning it up and down and strengthen it, which, thinking it forward, why not use that for doing the internal plastering as well? So the plaster's there. This all has obviously big knock-on effects to industry and tradespeople in the next few years. If this starts to happen, then what happens to your plumbers, what happens to your builders? You then have to start thinking about doing the BRG, the basic income route, to cover all these sort of things. There's lots of economic things to think about this. It's happening very fast now. What we call here. Even in the last couple of weeks, NASA have made a challenge to start to architectural companies to work with them to start to put ideas of how to 3D print buildings on the moon or on Mars or on asteroids. Foster Partners are working with the ESA, the European Space Agency in London, for exactly the same thing. And also, back to Holland again where I started, a Dutch company called Huijmans and MX3D are working on, and you can see this again on YouTube, 3D printing a metal bridge. There's actually a nozzle-based 3D printer which fires out a metal powder and sinks it in there and then and actually builds up a lattice bridge. And again, that may be usable within a concrete system to build up structures to make them able to build up even higher structures than sort of 2 or 3 stories. I think I'll probably end it there, otherwise I'll go over the top. Thank you.
Thank you. time for some questions for both Julian and David. If you will just put your hands up and we'll take questions.
An observation on 3D printed buildings. There's a lot of work to be done on fully volumetric and semi-volumetric prefabricated buildings, and the key element there has been getting the floor plates right. So the technology is not in the building itself, which should be developed. It's getting those foundations right. A few millimetres out, you can knock everything else out.
I was wondering if David, you have a perspective on the global, aspect of this divergence in terms of, bad politics, good politics, politics 0 and politics 2. Do you think some countries will go one direction, the other countries will go the other? Or?
I think we will be able to see good examples in some countries where people are experimenting. For example, in Finland, there's a variety of different political parties in Finland, but all of them are quite open to some experimentation with a simple form of universal basic income. And then we'll be able to see what is actually the social impact of such a scheme. So that is to our advantage. There are other unfortunate side effects of such an interconnected world, which is that some of the bad trends in regulation are above the levels of individual governments. They're at the international level, which makes the challenge even harder.
David, how do you think AI and machine learning will be used in democracy, more modern, your democracy 2.0?
Well, I don't think this is going to be a straightforward thing. I think it's going to take a while to figure out how to do it. So that's why I think we can glimpse democracy 2.0. We don't have it all worked out. It's like Web 2.0. And my slides, which I showed you, were from 2006. And there's quite a lot of vision there, but it didn't know it. It didn't predict Facebook. It didn't predict the details of how people would use a lot of the systems. So we need a lot of clever people to get involved in political think tanks and so forth, to taking time. And we need a community of futurists to gradually realize, actually this idea sounded attractive, but it's a bit too glib and simple. Then somebody else will come along and build on it. So we don't have the answers today, but we can say we need people thinking about it now.
For David, governments can be more centralized. We have one international global government, which is making different regulation across all worlds, all countries, or you can have a very decentralized approach where you have lots of innovation, lots of little areas, but then it's difficult to regulate across all of them. As we go forward in time, which model or some form of model would you advocate is the best balance?
Well, my clear answer is neither of these two models are the right one, and we're going to end up with some new combination. We'll be able to use some decentralized technologies very well, whether it's blockchain and others like that. So we no longer need to have central authority supervising things. We'll just get agreement to be written in. I think the role of the nation state probably will change in the future. I think the EU will change in the future as well. It's no longer attracting the same kind of vision and passion that it used to have for it. It's a sign that we need a different set of models. So we might end up with something which we wouldn't even recognize today as being the right model. And I have a question for Julian. When you talked about all this 3D printing making houses much easier, why are houses so expensive to rent here in London?
Yeah, I was going to say, what do you think it's going to do to the property prices?
Well,
It's not a frivolous question.
That is something that's in my chapter actually. It all depends on who has control of this technology. Going back to the politics again of it, if the big building companies have control of the technology, it probably won't have a dramatic effect because they'll want to take the profit margin for themselves. They might reduce the price slightly to get the sales, but they'll take the profit margin entirely for themselves. If the housing association gets hold of it, and this technology isn't heavily patented, and they can all go Kickstarter and whatever, then you're looking at houses down at the 30,000, 40,000 pounds. But the friend over there's got it right on the foundations. There are things like buying the land and producing the proper foundations for it that can be costly as well.
Yeah, David, while you talked about governments, I'm curious about what's your take on, anarchy and sort of terror, because what seems to be happening is with technology, it's much easier for groups of people to come together who have, a different worldview and want to impose that, right? So what's your take on that, and how do you see that sort of playing out?
So that's another topic in its own right. With Moore's law comes greater use of Moore's outlaws. Every few years, it's easier to wreak havoc. You don't need to have the same stellar high IQ to destroy the world anymore. You can do it with a smaller number. It's deadly serious, you know. And if we're not careful, we will see angry, alienated people who feel excluded by the system. They won't run off just and join ISIS, they'll run off and join some other organisations. So these threats are significant, and unless we can demonstrate a more inclusive future for people, not where we're all steamrolled to be the same, but which there's genuine diversity, then we risk things going. And in the meantime, we do need some measure of surveillance. There's no getting away from it, you know. So we have to figure out how do we get the surveillance so that it doesn't take away our privacy in a way that we regret. It's not an easy question, and I'm sure the chapters in the book will address that as well.
Cool. We're going to have to end it here because we're going to move on. Just one point though, I mean, for the first time we're seeing governments actually acknowledge that they need to be experimental. So the Icelandic government say, we don't know what the right model is for the world we're moving into. And last year there was a project by a guy called Mohammed Al-Burman, which was about how would you create a new country. A very realistic documentary is making about how you go about doing it. And in that, people are sort of, there's one camp who say you need to come up with a governance model first, and the other says no, actually when you get the people together you evolve the right governance model based on who comes. And just on land prices, house prices, it is all about who owns the land. Unless we still believe that we can give people ownership of the earth, and so you bought this piece of the earth and you can charge what you want for someone to put a building on it, then prices are going to go up in popular cities. Okay.